it is no mistake that Disney sequels suck, and that is something we've already established on my channel multiple times. The stories virtually go nowhere, and there wasn't any point to them other than money to begin with, but at the very least, they have more artistic value than most of the live action remakes as sequels. And of course, there are some that actually do stand out as good, like Cinderella 3, a movie regarded by the public as the best sequel that Disney has produced, which I kind of agree with too. Now, I don't think it's the best one either, but it does belong in the upper echelon of the direct-to-DVD sequels because it actually had something to say. And that is truly astounding for the most part, that Cinderella has been the only Disney property that has worked beyond its original to great success. I say for the most part because I actually hate Cinderella 2. I do not care what you say, I never liked it as a child, and I still don't like it as an adult either. And Cinderella 3 sorta made the movie pointless also, so it doesn't add up to the timeline at all, like most of the direct-to-DVDs anyway, redoing Anastasia's arc and not focusing on Jacques becoming human, and I hate that. This movie just sucks. But beyond that, Cinderella keeps proving to be the success that saves Disney in the most dire situations, from the original one that kept the studio afloat to saving the reputation of Disney sequels in the modern era, and creating the best live-action remake that has worked. I mean, everything about Cinderella 3 really improves upon what was really missing story-wise from the original film, especially its characters like Prince Charming and Anastasia that were virtually non-existent because the focus was sort of on Cinderella and mostly on the mice for some reason, which strangely enough in the early days of Disney, most of their princes, except for Philip in my opinion, had no real characters to them to focus on the princesses instead, which I guess was due to what they were focusing on at the time, and was glad to see at the very least that we can have something in these stories that acknowledge those faults and attempt to add something to their characters that weren't there. This is something I expressed in my review of the live action film that made it work and made it his story that made him stand out even more so than this film, giving way to his decisions as a character and the best portrayal of him to date, but still absolutely love the direction that Cinderella 3 to actually take the Prince Charming story to add on to this world of the original film. Besides, where else are you going to get the greatest scene to come out of Disney animation if it weren't for this? And so today, I just wanted to focus on why Cinderella 3 works as a story that really adds something that the original film didn't have to say for it, and as a Disney sequel itself that many others don't get, or really don't want to get. Because this film feels like it's addressing the primary concerns that people originally had with the original film that lacked any sense of grand story that this and the other live action film provided in more detail. And it's done through this use of twisting time with the wand to begin again at the end of the first movie, like they were rewriting it to give other characters that virtually didn't exist a second chance to be explored. And yeah, also rewriting the fact that Cinderella 2 even existed because it sucks. The beginning already shows that her life is perfect with the prince doing things a year after the events of the film, where the mice and fairy godmother are planning a picnic to celebrate their first anniversary. And then we cut to Lady Tremaine and her daughters, where her daughters now have to fill in the role that Cinderella had, where it puts an emphasis on Anastasia's character, who for some can actually see this as her own story rather than Cinderella's because we already know her story. One of the interesting things they do with the sequels is make Anastasia's character more sympathetic and not just a snobby step-sibling, and I think it adds something else rather than just being designed as an ugly stepsister like the rest of her family that just hates Cinderella for being beautiful and wanting to find her own love in life. And I really think that she is the real protagonist of the story, like many have said, established by the song she sings to actually focus on that, where I also like the fact she is voiced by Daisy Duck's voice actor. And it is through the fairy godmother's ignorant clumsiness that Anastasia gets the wand to contribute to the plot of the story happening when she presents it to her family, where we get this funny line through her sister.
A stick.
Ooh, let's beat her with it.
I mean, it was obvious that they never wanted Drizella to have a character arc or development in these films, so they just stuck with her being a sadist that was voiced by Minnie Mouse herself, the late Russi Taylor, who also voiced Fairy Godmother in this film, who comes in and actually changes Lady Tremaine's mind about the stick and the wand Anastasia was talking about. Where I would also like to add, she is voiced by Wanda's voice actor from Fairly Odd Parents, setting things into motion when Anastasia accidentally turns Fairy Godmother into stone, the opportunity to start fresh after her humiliating defeat. And the best thing about this is how they showcase the reversal of fortunes from the first film when she reverses time for them. The moment that appears at the end of the first film now being ripped apart physically from them constantly and portrayed with this green cloud that represents envy that Lady Tremaine always had for Cinderella and brings them back to that very ending, having Cinderella still locked up and having a wand to make the slipper fit Anastasia instead, really trying to make her a primary focus of this film as she is the one who actually wants love and affection while the other two are just in it for themselves. This leads us to reintroduce Cinderella. The moment she was supposed to escape in the original and try to slip her on, it was already too late when Lady Tremaine already used the wand for her own desires, destroying the slippers so she couldn't prove that she was the real one anyway. And this scene is nice to show that they wanted to spend more time to focus on her character specifically while dialing back the mice a bit more. In the original, they really take up a lot of screen time that holds it back from being a great story, where through this song it establishes her determination and character as the one who made the connection with the prince and allowed her an opportunity to prove her worth from being treated as worthless by her own stepmother. This also reintroduces us to characters introduced in the second film like Prudence, who of course doesn't know Cinderella yet as of this time, and establish how it was before, which is a nice touch that they acknowledge the second film, but overall it just makes her character feel useless and that film itself, because this film just undid everything about it. But beyond that is where we finally get reintroduced to the film's greatest character in Prince Charming himself, fencing with his dad. And like the beginning, the best thing about his part is the fact they gave more character to him by having his lines the moment he's introduced, because in the original they only had him sing part of the song that Cinderella was singing and only a few lines to speak to Cinderella before she left, and that was basically it. The original just used him as a plot point rather than an actual character, where now they actually gave him all the character that literally overshone everyone in this film, even Cinderella herself. Not to say it wasn't a bad thing or taking away anything that they built with the others like Anastasia and Cinderella, because I said the development of them as the real protagonists of the movie was greatly appreciated, but I just find how great it was that they made the most least interesting character from the original film into the most interesting character. Something that surprisingly enough, the live action remake balanced out with both Kit and Ella's characters' arcs that made that film a better story than the original itself. But back to the point, this scene establishes what the prince had that connected him to Cinderella from the original, the point of finding true love and actually showing us for the first time his mother through the painting, how the love of his parents really connected to him to find his own love in his life that the original sort of discussed because of his stubbornness to actually marry somebody. It's scenes like this that make the decisions of the original movie stand out more, because it chose to show us what he wanted rather than just being the object of Cinderella's freedom and the king's wish to have grandchildren, and showing us that it wasn't just a glass slipper fitting to be the important piece in finding his love. It was also great to learn that the guy who voiced him was also the voice of Prince Eric in The Little Mermaid and Spider-Man from the '94 series, so you can see they chose him as an established authority on how to make a prince stand out. That's not to say I think Spider-Man is the reason why they chose, I mean Prince Eric is the, you know what I mean. Because when he finally gets the chance to see the woman he loves, he immediately makes the observation that Anastasia is not her. He explains how he expected someone else, stating that probably more than one person actually fits the shoe, and actually showcases what I said earlier by having a real connection when he laid eyes upon Cinderella for the first time and the time they spent dancing together. That now we know that he knows exactly who he was with and not some random ugly ass girl who fits a glass slipper. No offense, Anastasia. It just makes it better for his character and exploring his personality to showcase to Lady Tremaine that not everything with a wand is an easy win, where she has to force a spell onto him to believe Anastasia was the one he danced with, which convinces him to propose to Anastasia and get married the same night. This then brings us to Cinderella meeting the prince again for the first time, convinced that he will remember her by looking at her, not knowing he's under a spell, confusing her for the initial conversation. It is also through this that we learn the effects of the spell are not as strong as initially thought, when he makes it clear he intends to marry the girl he danced with, but also showcasing something through her eyes to suggest that he somehow knows that this is the one, but the spell is just too strong enough to resist it completely. It leaves her heartbroken again, but the mice were also there at the scene as well and are able to tell Cinderella that Lady Tremaine put him under a spell to force him to marry Anastasia. I like this because it shows how much focus they are putting on them as characters and the important role they have without intruding overall in the story like the original, because the story really focused on them and Lucifer too much, where they should have just killed him off in that scene at the end of the film. But it doesn't really matter. It did what it needed to do at the time, and we should just be thankful for this movie that actually makes it stronger overall. This then leads us back to spend time with Anastasia being introduced to the king after the whole wacky sequence ruining the reception room, which is very important for her story at the end, as we will see, because this is the moment where the movie tries to recreate the dance with Anastasia instead. It shows that Anastasia never really danced with the prince and contradicts everything that the prince believes, since she gracefully danced with Honorella at the night before, where he says something like this.
I'll never forget when I first touched your hand.
This shows us more how the spell is not really working, bringing us back to the moment where he saw Cinderella again. How you see on his face that something feels off when he touches Anastasia. He's not feeling anything with her, and it really adds another layer to how he connected with Cinderella on that night. Because clearly we see Anastasia making so many mistakes, stepping on his foot when they tried to move, and that was something that never happened at all during that night, but at least still easily forgivable in his heart, where you can see he has respect for Anastasia beyond the spell itself, which is actually something that warms her own heart. Seeing someone give her such compassion that she never actually experienced in her life being around her snotty sister and cold-hearted mother. But of course, despite seeing Anastasia feeling like she has a connection with him, we turn back to the prince, who then tells the Grand Duke that he felt nothing when he touched her hand, despite knowing he already danced with her. Then of course we cut to the king having a chat with her future daughter-in-law about her skills being dreadful but also similar to his own wife. The painting we see actually show us that she is very similar to Anastasia in terms of dancing ability and of course hair color, showing us that it's always more than meets the eye that matters and something that comes deep within the heart that he connected with. This shows us what the movie was trying to teach us in terms of love coming from within rather than out, where he gives her a seashell that he and his wife found and how they both found it together, tying back into the touch of the hand of where you can find true love. It gives Anastasia new hope, showing that someone like her can find love despite knowing that the touch of a hand was never meant for her but for Cinderella, knowing what is really meant in that situation. It's how she believes that she could be loved for her rather than the powers of magic, because that's what she thinks is more important to her life that her mother and sister do not understand, using magic as a way to achieve their most petty desires instead. And because of this arrogance, it allows Cinderella to slip back in and steal the wand before she can complete her goal. But of course she gets caught, but not before meeting the prince again to remind him of something he already felt and the spell he is under. It then showcases his doubt turning from what he believed, knowing that there is something about the girl that stands out and questioning the motives of the Tremaines, while Cinderella gets put on a ship out of the kingdom. And actually thinking about this entire sequence brings up a major complaint I have about this movie, because like, why didn't she just use the wand to fix things in the moment, since everything started in the sequence because she put him under spell? Like, Cinderella could actually reverse things in the moment if she just said bibbidi bobbidi boo, because that's how it works for anyone. Or yeah, what about Lady Tremaine just using Anastasia to dance better or solve their problems a lot more easier through magic? Like, there's so many ways that actually they could use the wand that they just didn't use. It's just that using a magic wand makes things way more complicated than needs to be, and it's something I can never get over in this movie. But okay, considering what they wanted to teach us in the story anyway. This then turns things for the worse in the prince's mind, because he starts talking to bluebirds and mice about finding the truth, which he actually does when they explain in song everything that has happened, which surprisingly he actually understands despite the absurdity of the situation, knowing the connection he made with both girls. And when they finally bring back the broken glass slipper that somehow I guess animals of that size can actually fix, it finally convinces him to find her and brings out the best scene in the movie, where the king thinks he's going crazy, where he does this absolutely hilarious slide down the banister to chase his son. And of course it doesn't stop there, because it leads us to the most infamous scene that all of us know to make his grand escape.
I forbid you to take another step down these stairs! Okay.
Like, they really knew what they were doing when making this film, that showed us how much they were willing to take his character to the absolute next level, where he escapes on horse and the king actually accepts because he actually understands what matters in his heart that we discussed with Anastasia earlier. It then shows us him racing against the clock to stop the ship and find Cinderella, where it also produces this funny scene. So stupid. And looking back on something like this, I'm just surprised how far they were willing to take his character to the newer funny heights that was non-existent in the first film, and making him the most fun out of the entire movie up to this point. Where of course, looking back on the scene with the touch of the hand, it finally breaks the spell and allows him to get back to the events of the movie. So as we can see up to this point, this film works really well back to back with the original story to finally give some personality and meaning to the overall characters, breaking the Tremaine's plans once again, where Anastasia realizes that he never loved her and now forces Lady Tremaine to disguise her as Cinderella, as we see when she gets ready for the wedding once again, thinking that this is the disguise would work for them, sending her to a pumpkin. But this time, unlike the first film, it's not a luxurious one, but a straight up revolting one, commandeered by Lucifer himself to take them to their demise. Very poetic in my opinion for this movie. But of course, he's a bad kitty, so it doesn't matter, and they try to make their way back in time to stop the wedding and the Tremaines once and for all. It then sees us back to the wedding, where Honorella talks to the king, questioning if you can can find love with the touch of a hand, settling in this doubt of being loved because she's being someone she is not, tying back to what she wants for her rather than her mother who controls all of her choices. The scene then builds up where Cinderella rushes, where you keep seeing Anastasia on her face not content at all with the situation, where Lady gets angry and desperate for her to say I do, where at this moment, by the touch of her hand with the prince, that he actually knows that this is not Cinderella. You see it on his shocked face, tying into how it's not just on the outside that counts, where despite her looking like her in all the ways, she still isn't Cinderella, and finally confirms that by saying I don't to this suspicion. This then leads the king to arrest Lady Tremaine and Drusilla after the real Cinderella comes into view, before she turns all of the guards into animals and tries to do it to Cinderella and her own daughter before being reflected by the prince's sword, sending them to the basement as toads. This of course ends things for the better, where it once again allows our two lovebirds to reconnect, and Anastasia revealing herself in a similar fashion that the fairy godmother did to Cinderella's dress, showcasing an important moment to bring out who we really are as characters and doing the same thing to restore Cinderella's dress and bringing the fairy godmother back together. This then brings us to a heartwarming conversation with the king and Anastasia, where she tries to give back the show he gave her, knowing nothing she had was really earned, but then of course he states that she deserves the chance as well, giving us this grand hug that showcases that anyone deserves the chance to find love no matter who you are, that yes, you can achieve it despite looking a certain way. And of course this ends things for the better, where the fairy godmother allows them to live this new happy ending rather than returning them to the beginning of the movie to live happily ever after, finally ending the movie on a good note, where the credits end giving us a glimpse where she meets Baker for a second time all over again, where not everything was lost, and then of course finally really ending things where Lady and Drusilla become mates, leaving them with the worst punishment they know of in their lives. All in all, Cinderella 3 is the strongest film of this trilogy because it showcases what you can do with the characters who weren't the major focuses of the original incarnations, but done in a way that improves upon it without ruining it, and it's why this film worked more so than any other direct-to-DVD or sequel that Disney has produced. Cinderella is just a story that proves how much they can do from before that has worked, and the only one that managed to get it right every single time, while almost discounting Cinderella 2. And it's why I liked it and do rank it higher in the tier of sequel content. And the lesson that we should all take away from here and films like this is how Disney can provide great storytelling, but it all comes from a matter if they are willing to do so, and if they don't, then of course they will all fail like they have done so in the modern times. With that all said, I'm all done, so goodbye.